Y podemos empezar con la presentación de Rosie. Adelante.
Buenos dias and good morning. Thank you to Innerbusk for the opportunity to be here with you today. It's truly a great honour to be in a region that has such a long and proud history of innovation, which I think is a critical success factor in innovation leadership. So I'm going to talk for the next 15 minutes about leadership. As I said, a critical success factor in any sort of innovation. There are a lot of myths about leadership, though, and one of the biggest is that every leader is a potential change agent, and in the right circumstances, they'll do what needs to be done, they'll step up, and they'll make a difference. I really wish that were the case, but there's mounting evidence that that's not so. So who are the leaders and where are they, the leaders who are able to take us through these very disruptive but exciting times? Let's take a look. Many of you will recognise this man. He's a knight, a priest, a theologian, the founder of the Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuits. His influence is still being felt today, not only here in Spain, but around the world through the work of the Jesuits. So fast forward 5 centuries to Sydney, Australia, and this rather attractive young woman, Maria Atkinson. Maria has won global recognition for her pioneering work in mainstreaming sustainability as a core business issue. When she was global head of sustainability for a major property development company with a footprint right across the Asia Pacific. As well as her day job, Maria co-founded the Green Building Council and was instrumental in many reforms that actually changed the face of her industry, not just in Australia, but around the world. So what do Ignatius of Loyola and Maria Atkinson have in common? Well, we would say that they're both catalysts, a very rare breed of transformative and visionary leader. Something else that they probably have in common is very deep resilience and perseverance, because let me tell you, it's not easy being this type of leader, particularly at these times. Catalysts, we know, have immense potential as transformers, but the irony is that quite often where they're operating, that potential is never realised. Typically, catalysts, in our experience, are overlooked by executive search firms, by recruitment agencies. Within large organisations, they're passed over for leadership development opportunities. They may not even make the high potential talent pool. It's not uncommon in large organisations, in our experience, for them to be sidelined. They are mavericks. They're ignored. Often they're ridiculed for some of their ideas. And in large organisations particularly that are grappling with huge turbulence and complex issues, quite often they're a lone and lonely voice with a very different perspective. But the reality is that we need them now more than ever, because we're going through, as a global community, a major inflection point. And I'm sure that that was part of the opening address. We need catalysts more than ever to help us through this transition. And as you know, being in this room and being part of the innovation industry, that transition is not pretty. Far-reaching global trends are converging, and the rate of disruption and change has never been higher. Many of you will know John Hagel, who heads Deloitte's Centre for the Edge. He's called it the big shift. Many people talk about the new normal. What we know is that the rate of disruption and change has never been higher, and many leaders and organisations are actually struggling to keep up. So it's never been more important than ever to have in the the right people in the positions of power and influence. Unfortunately, the evidence is starting to tell us that we don't. And don't take my word for it. When you have people right at the top of the pyramid, and in this case I'm talking about the World Economic Forum and the people that the World Economic Forum calls thought leaders, they've acknowledged that we actually have a global leadership crisis. But don't count on the leadership industry to pull us out of this. The leadership development industry is actually part of the problem. And we're talking about a very profitable industry here. And look, hands up, I've been part of it. McKinsey estimates that in the US alone, companies spend something like $14 billion a year on leadership development. The problem is that it continues to turn out leaders that don't have the capability or the mindsets to cope with the sort of world that we live in now, the turbulence, the complexity, the ambiguity. So with this disconnect, we're confronted with a range of worsening symptoms. And I'm sure many of these will be very familiar to you in this room. Let's just talk about 3. Engagement. The global company Gallup conducts an annual survey of employee engagement around the world in most economies. And in its most recent survey, looking at the US alone, only 30% of workers in the US are engaged in their jobs, which means that 70% of workers are either disengaged or actively disengaged. So this has massive implications for enterprise productivity and motivation. Trust. The Edelman Trust Barometer, in its latest annual survey, says that our trust in institutions is at an all-time low. And the third area, which I'm sure you're very and painfully familiar, is job creation and job destruction as a part of this disruption. I was looking at a blog post by a well-known innovation blogger, Tim Castell, who is based at the University of Queensland in Australia. He just looked at a period of 12 days in May and listed some of the jobs that have been shed over 12 days in May. US Steel, more layoffs. That's 9,000 jobs gone so far for the year. Siemens, one of the world's biggest private employers, announced another 4,500 jobs gone, which is 12,000 for the year. Dow Chemical, GM Holden, the list goes on and on. Just in 12 days, 15,000 jobs were gone from these major companies. The OECD has warned that G20 nations will face a jobs deficit until 2018 unless we find different ways to spur growth and think differently. The problem is that we can't count on the current crop of leaders to get us through. The research tells us that most of those in formal leadership positions today are actually failing at the job. Not only are they risk averse, and I'm sure you know some of these, they miss promising opportunities, they sidestep emerging opportunities, they continue to destroy value by insisting on applying old linear thinking to very new, very complex problems and hoping that it will work. And I know a lot of these leaders, and they're good people. They're doing the best that they can, but the problem is that they've been trained to lead in a world that no longer exists. But fortunately for us, and I'm an optimist, there is this small but significant group of leaders with a transformative mindset and capabilities that we can actually identify, develop, and tap. So industrial era leaders tend to trade on logic and rationality, systems and processes, all great, but they tend to discount anything that they don't understand or that doesn't fit with their particular worldview. The trouble is that the list of things that we don't know and that we can't possibly predict is getting longer and longer every day. The people that we call catalysts, on the other hand, have an intuitive understanding of the system. They see the connections, the interdependencies, and they do understand the futility of applying simplistic solutions to very complex issues and expecting it to work. Catalysts are a truly rare breed. They sense patterns, they're weak signals way before anybody else. So from an innovation perspective, these are extremely valuable individuals as peers, as collaborators, but most importantly, when they're in leadership roles where they're able to create the settings so that you guys can actually do the good work that you want to do. They instinctively know that knowledge no longer sits with individuals, it sits within the network. So they're natural collaborators, they tend to cross boundaries, they gravitate towards the right people, they tend not to let rules and constraints stop them from doing things, which makes them an interesting management challenge. So to realise this immense potential, they take very different handling. So we've made it our quest to find and develop and support as many catalysts as we can. As the late Steve Jobs of Apple said, they connect the dots. And again, I'm sure you know people like that. So catalysts connect the dots, they get to work. They're highly adaptive, highly productive, highly inventive. They actively seek out very different viewpoints, sometimes completely counter to their own, and they don't try to fit them into what they know. They're very deep listeners, so they're quite okay with not knowing. Steve Jobs was a catalyst, in our opinion, like the internet founder Tim Berners-Lee, and Al Gore, the man that everybody said was most well qualified to be president, but didn't make it. So when Al Gore lost that election in the year 2000, he probably had no idea at that point that he would go on to catalyse a worldwide campaign for action on climate change. And that's the thing about catalysts. They're able to hold very deep, very big aspirations, but their vision tends to unfold in small emergent steps, which gives them this amazing power to pivot and adapt and incorporate new information, new circumstances. So if you look at somebody like the founder of the Grameen Bank, Muhammad Yunus, I bet he didn't start out wanting to win a Nobel Prize. Well, maybe he did, but you know, intending to win a Nobel Prize or invent microfinance. He started when and where he could. He was with 43 villages and he decided at that point to loan them what he had in his pocket, which was a total of $27. And the rest is history. So aside from somebody like Al Gore, most of these people weren't famous when they started out. And let's face it, not everybody wants to change the world. And we know that right now, around the world, there are catalysts everywhere working to improve their schools, their communities, their businesses, their industries, their sectors. So individual catalysts are able to achieve incredible things. I've seen it, I know many of them. But it's when you connect a group of catalysts that the magic absolutely happens. And we're actually doing just that in my home state in Australia, South Australia. South Australia, like Spain, is going through very, very tough economic times with the decline of traditional manufacturing, the highest youth unemployment in the nation, and what I would call a general loss of direction and loss of hope. So we're working with a group of senior catalysts we've assembled outside formal structures, power structures, to actually create a new future together. So it's very early days, it's very organic and emergent work. But the commitment is there to actually accelerate the state's transition to a new way of living and working together. So we know how to find this rare breed of leader, and we made the decision 18 months ago to create a community of catalysts, to remove the isolation, connect them with like-minded souls, and help them work with each other on truly complex issues. And that community in our part of the world is growing. We also work with a small number of large organisations to find their internal catalysts, because they're coming to understand that this is an incredible competitive advantage. But one thing we do know about catalysts is that they live with paradox quite easily. They're not afraid to say what needs to be said, to do what needs to be done, however unorthodox that might seem at the time. And an outstanding example of this was Nelson Mandela in 1995. So it was the early days of the post-apartheid era. Nelson Mandela had arrived at the rugby stadium for the Rugby World Cup final in Johannesburg, wearing, of all things, the Springboks jersey. And for those of you who know South Africa, this was a hated symbol of oppression by whites during the apartheid era. So when Mandela took the stage, he immediately raised his hand in the black ANC salute. So by bringing those two things together, he sent this incredibly powerful message of reconciliation to a nation that really needed it at that particular time. So did Nelson Mandela know that this would work? Who knows? We'll never know. But he clearly believed that it was worth the risk, and what he demonstrated was something that we see time and again with catalysts, very deep, very real courage. So I'm optimistic about what's ahead, for all that I've said. I've already had the opportunity to meet some catalysts in Bilbao, so I can see that there's a global movement. But as we navigate through these turbulent times, we actually need to very quickly identify and work with people like the Mandelas and find more catalysts. So thank you very much for listening and for the generous invitation to join you here today and talk about our work. We're very passionate about it, and if you feel that I've been talking about you or if you know any catalysts, we absolutely want to hear from you. So please enjoy the rest of the program, and gracias.
Thank you, Josie, for sharing your interesting ideas with us. I am confident that you're going to find many catalysts in Bilbao, which is the best city in the world, so you're going to find many here.